Hello, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. My name is Jonathan, and thanks for tuning in. Today, I have the rare opportunity to share with you an interview I conducted with jazz legend, bass legend Ron Carter. Ron has been on well over 2,500 recordings, and that makes him one of the most recorded bassists in all history. From Chico Hamilton to Eric Dolphy, Randy Weston, McCoy Tyner, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, Antonio Carlos Jobim, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, MC Solar, Tribe Called Quest, Jim Hall, Mulgrew Miller, Russell Malone, and many others, Harold Mayburn. You can say that Ron is truly a well-rounded and versed bass player in all sorts of genres, and really someone who has a knowledge of upright and electric bass. Ron is an excellent teacher and has many students that are close and dear to him, including myself, and I'm really fortunate that I've been able to study with him, and he was nice enough to invite me into his home for us to conduct this interview up on the Upper West Side. It's a beautiful apartment. And Ron sat down, and his words are like gold. I mean, you can't go wrong checking out this interview and hearing some words from a true master, one of the remaining masters in jazz. And Ron was great in that he answered all the questions that I asked him, and to the best of his ability. And I hope you guys will be able to learn something from watching this interview. So this interview is a little bit of under an hour long, and it is really in depth. Please watch the whole thing. Once you have some time, or if you got a chance, you can tune into little small parts and come back and watch it. We also have other interviews on this channel with other great artists. Please check those out, and stay tuned for future interviews from musicians such as David Gilmour, Kevin Norton, and Gary Smallin, and Benito Gonzalez. So please continue watching and stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the great honor of interviewing one of the greatest and most recorded bassists of all time, Ron Carter. Now, I won't go into too many details about your early background because there are numerous interviews on the topic, as well as the biography recently put out by Dan Willett, Finding the Right Notes. But can you briefly start by telling us where you grew up and how you get started playing the music?
I'm from Ferndale, Michigan, which is a block from Detroit. The teacher came in one day at the third and fourth graders, 10-year-old groups, and said that here's some instruments. Play around with them and see which one you like the best, and the cello seemed to be the most interesting to me. So I started playing cello at 10, 11 years old.
And when you started playing cello, what kind of music did you listen to? What was your
only classical music at the time.
What kind of composers? Just
Bach cello suites, the Dvorak cello concerto, the usual cello library, scales and skill development.
Yeah, interesting. So then, you were really fortunate enough to attend the Cass Tech School, which is, in my opinion, one of the great art schools during that time. I mean,
yes.
So many great cats came out of there. Can you tell us a little bit about the program there and your time there?
Well, it's like a junior college, actually, for 10, 11, and 12 graders. We had our own interest. If you were interested in repairing cars, they had an auto mechanics part. If you were interested in fashion design and sewing skills, they had a fashion department. If you're interested in architecture, they had an architecture department. And of course, if you're interested in music, they had a great music department. You had to audition to get in and pass exams to get in, and you had to maintain a certain grade level to stay there.
And, you guys, I remember reading that you were in like the chorus there, and you had to play a second instrument.
We did everything. We had to be in the bands. I played E-flat alto clarinet in the band, and the marching band I played tenor saxophone, and of course everybody tried to sing in the choir, so we'd sing the choir. So we had a full, complete music program. We had dance, they had theater, had mixed sets for the back of the little stage production. So it was a complete music program.
Wow, I mean, I guess
At
that
11th
must have
grade,
helped you
we're doing
later on, right? That
well, it helped in that I saw how it worked, but I didn't necessarily need that to do what I was doing, you know.
and were there any particular cats while you were at school that you collaborated with?
Well, at Cass, I was primarily a classical player, so I had very little interaction with the jazz community. So I didn't know any of those guys while I was going to school there.
And
I mean,
you decided,
I knew of them, but I never had
but
any.
you never interacted with
No.
them. You decided to play bass though when the bass chair became available. I
Yes.
think it was Paul Chambers who left, right? Was
He,
that?
he went to New York to join, I think, J&K, J.J. Johnson and Kay Wine. They had a great quintet, two-trombone quintet, and Paul went to join them.
Yeah. So then you decided to start playing bass because
There's a bass chair
there's more
open.
opportunities. Yeah. And did you know Paul at all at Cass Tech? Did he?
I knew him to speak to him, but again, you know, that wasn't my circle of friends, you
Yeah,
know, and so we would speak, and his dad and my dad drove on the same bus line in Detroit, so I didn't know him through our relationship, but I was into a different kind of routine, you know.
Yeah. Well, fast forwarding to Eastman School of Music,
Mhm.
you went to Eastman. You were the first chair double bassist in the orchestra.
Yes, it was called the Eastman Philharmonia, which was assembled the fall of 1958. Of all the best students in the school, and I was the first chair in it.
Well, that's great. That's no easy task. You know?
No.
And you also made some jazz gigs at the same time, right, around
Well,
Rochester?
I was trying to stay in school, you know, and being from a large family, wasn't out of help available financially. I got a full scholarship, but they only covered a certain part of the school bill, as you know. So I got hooked up with the local rhythm section, and we were the backup rhythm section for acts would come to Rochester at a place called the Ridgecrest Inn. And so I got a chance to play with Slim Gaylord and Sonny Stitt and people like that. I got a chance to hear Dizzy Gillespie every night,
Amazing, yeah.
Carmen McRae or Horace Silver. So I got a chance to meet the community by way of working with them opposite them on weekends.
Was there any particular moment that you remember really getting started with jazz? Somebody like showing you a thing or two, or did you just really jump into it?
Well, I kind of jumped into one of my neighbors was an alto player who liked Paul Desmond and Dave Brubeck. And back in those days, all the frat houses had jazz bands playing on the weekends. And I guess one week when I was home for summer vacation, his bass player was unavailable, so he said, "Can you do this gig?" I said, "Well, I don't know the tunes, man." He said, "Well, here's the record, and listen to these tunes. We'll just play these 6 tunes tonight." So that's how I got started.
Wow, that's great. And one of the defining moments of your life was when the conductor, Leopold Ziskowski of the Houston Symphony, told you that he really admired your bass playing, but that the world wasn't ready for a black bassist in an orchestral setting. It must have been really a crushing blow to you. How did you react to that?
Well, in working with the jazz community, they told me that New York would welcome a good player. So I was, as a 20-year-old, to have your career crushed like that, you know, it's not an easy thing to get over, and I'm not quite sure I'm past that stage in my head yet. You know, intellectually, I have a way to get around it, but you still feel some of the pangs of that kind of commentary, as honest as it was, and maybe it was a way. It's the only way I could have understood it if he put it in those kind of blunt terms, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that not a lot has changed in the past 52 years or so.
Yeah, it's still
54 years or so, and it's still quite difficult for an African American to get a job in a major orchestra, for a lot of other reasons, of course, a lot of other additional reasons, but that's still on the plate, you know. But I think that his honesty and his bluntness was important to hear it straight out. You know, he said, "I like the way you play it, but the orchestra is not ready to hire an African American musician." You know, and we're talking about the '50s, man.
Yeah.
This is way before Rosa Parks got cranked up, you know.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
So it was before the upheaval of civil rights really took hold, and he may have saved me some grief. In any event, he kind of helped me steer myself toward the jazz community, which welcomes good players with open arms.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was a path that you don't regret one bit going into the jazz community.
I'm working at it. I'm still working at it.
Well, which guys in New York really inspired you when you started playing?
Well, people think this is a strange answer, but not a bass player. I was kind of impressed by the skill level of J.J. Johnson. You know, he was able to find all those notes within a small range of the trombone. And Cecil Payne, who I worked with Randy Weston for a really long time, was able to take his instrument, which was common to Eric Carney and Pepper Adams and Fritz Charloff and Leo Parker, and Jerry Mulligan, make the instrument sound like Cecil Payne, and that really impressed me.
Yeah, that's interesting to be inspired by a different instrument to apply that knowledge to the bass and do something different with it.
Well, it showed me possibilities that maybe I would not have seen if I had necessarily been enamored by another bass player or group of bass players. Of course, in New York, good players always impress you, because that's why they're in New York, man, you know, and if you walk around long enough, man, and listen to enough music, you find somebody that really knocks your socks off. Say, wow, check that out.
Yeah. Well, another question I have, you mentioned to me, and it's been mentioned that you went to the Lennox School of Music. You were part of that.
No. I was working up there with Randy Weston, a place called Avaloq, which was a resort center at the time.
Oh, okay.
And the Music Barn, which was run at the time by John Lewis and George Russell. They were like 2 miles away.
Oh, okay.
So every afternoon when I wasn't working with Randy at night, I would just go over there and just watch what took place. So I wasn't enrolled in the classes. But I did get a chance to meet and spend some quantitative time with Percy Heath and John Lewis, and we had George Russell, and I had some great talks, and it was a nice way of inadvertently networking with people who I would see way down the line.
You know? Yeah, I've heard from many people, amongst others, Larry Ridley, about that impact that the school had on a lot of cats.
Oh yeah, it's important.
Yeah, and so, moving backward, you came to New York in 1959. August. It was truly an excellent time to be in New York for jazz. You started working with Chico Hamilton. How was that?
My first experience on the road with Chico was an experience, as he was traveling all the time and knew all the ins and outs and made recommendations, the do's and don'ts, and told me about taking taxes out of my pay and per diem and filing income tax and publishing rights and royalties. I mean, it was really a free school for me, despite playing every night. I enjoyed playing with him. I learned a lot about how bass drum works. I learned about how to run rehearsals at a really early stage and being hopefully a band leader way over there somewhere. I got a chance to play with and meet Eric Dolphy and Dennis Buttermere, so I had a great time with that band for about 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, that's great that you're able to do something like that at that time. I mean, nowadays we have to go to school, pay for college to try and get somewhat of a teacher mentorship situation, but back then I'm sure it was like...
But there are bands around that offer that. The musicians today aren't interested in that. They're interested in all being band leaders, and it's kind of to their detriment, I think, that they're missing the chance to not be under the responsibility or have the weight of making those kind of decisions without any kind of real experience and watching them being made by someone else for a period of time.
Sure. Well, after moving to New York, you started attending Manhattan School of Music for your master's in music. What compelled you to attend that program?
Well, I had, once I left Eastman, I had auditioned for Manhattan, another school, Manhattan, and they accepted me as a student. And I thought that if I'm going to be in New York trying to earn a living, it just seemed to me that if I can get to go to a good school like Manhattan, which was not a jazz school at the time, but they had a great theater department and a great orchestra. So here's a chance for me to kind of maintain my classical skills, learn another view of how to compose and analyze compositions, and be in New York and meet some musicians who maybe I could get some jazz pictures along the way. So it was kind of a great move for me at the time.
And it must have been a challenge, balancing your family and working gigs, and being on the road at the same time.
Well, I think they just do that, man. I mean, the musicians are responsible and they have a goal in mind. They hope that their family understands the ramifications of traveling, and that they will not get too bent out of shape if dad's not home for 2 weeks, or if the husband's gone for a week on doing some work. In my case, my family was understanding and encouraging, and when I could, I'd take them out with me for 4 or 5 days on the road. It wasn't too far away from New York, so it was a good time for me.
Yeah, that's good. Now let's talk. You mentioned that you worked with Jackie Beyer, Cannonball Adderley, Randy Weston. Some of these early cats that you started working with, who was your favorite person you worked with and talked with?
They were all favorites because they all were open-minded. If I asked a question, I'd get an answer. And my job was to see how complete was the answer. Cannon was very forthcoming. Randy Weston talked about publishing. And Bobby Timmons knew a lot of songs I didn't know. So I thought, again, it was a good time for me to kind of keep my mouth shut and my ears open.
And can we talk a little bit about working with Miles, since that was probably one of the...
Not a lot, go ahead.
The story's been told many times about how you got asked by Miles to work with him. But you really set a tone with him in the way that you kind of told him, hey, Mr. Davis, I have another band that I'm committed to. You need to speak with that band leader before you get on, with me, with hiring me, which really set a tone with him. When you worked with him, what was your favorite time to be working? Because there was a few different combinations before the legendary quintet came together. 7 Steps to Heaven was a different band.
Well, yeah, I think I never answer that question as you pose it, because the answer implies that the other bands were less interesting and less important, and I had less fun with them, and none of that's true. I had fun with all those guys. The personnel was changing, of course, as I joined the band. Jimmy Cobb stayed on to finish the tour with Miles, and he left to join Wes and Paul, Wynton Kelly, to form a trio back West Montgomery. And we got back to New York from the 6-week tour. Harold Mabern and Frank Strozic and alto left the band, and George Coleman stayed on, and Herbie and Tony joined the band. So those were times when the band wasn't in upheaval, it was settling to a personnel. And while this settling was going on, we were learning in the library. So again, it was a chance for me to go to school free. I'm learning how my songs work. Herbie knew all these chords I didn't understand, and didn't have a way to manipulate on the bass. George had great skill and knew all the tunes and all the keys. Tony was just beginning to really be impressive. So I was at a good time in my life again.
Yeah, and you guys, there's the great story of you guys, your first meeting in the basement of Miles's apartment, just a few blocks from here.
Mm-hmm.
And he just left you guys there and went up and was listening to you guys on the intercom. How was that day for you? You were kind of took the leadership role, right? In that, when it was
it was kind of
first chance meeting, right?
It was kind of I hate to say it's thrust on me, because it's not really what I mean. But clearly Miles had a little more confidence that I could do certain things that the other guys weren't able to do as easily, either because they didn't experience or just weren't interested in doing it. Because I was kind of put in this role, I had a different point of view. The band had a different point of view of me, not just as a bass player in the band, but the guy who knows the hotel reservations. He knows how to check the airline schedule, stuff, the payroll, those kind of stuff that, again, they either weren't interested in or were much more occupied playing the music and had other things to do at that time in their life, you know. Tony was looking for an apartment, you know. Herbie was about to get married, and he had moved. So there was a whole lot of stuff going on in their lives other than the Miles Davis band. At the time, it seemed I was the most focused and the less fragmented than those guys were. They kind of trusted my judgment. If I said that, guys, we got to do this, no one said, well, man, who are you? Or why are we doing this? They just trusted that I had done enough research or was experienced enough to know that this has to be done this way. Can we get on with the program? You know?
Yeah. Well, what kind of stuff were you thinking about while playing bass with this group? I mean, you were truly innovative on the bass and created a whole new path in modern bass playing. What kind of things were you thinking about with regards to your bass and music?
Well, you know, I think, Mr. Jonathan, that while you're playing in the moment, that there are not a lot of thoughts going on, you know, and I think it's hard for me to look back 50 years and say, at this time I was thinking about this chord and this tune. I just can't do that.
Yeah, sure.
But I think overall my view as we were playing was that how can we make this work? How can I help this experiment maintain the integrity of the music? You know? And I think we all had that focus. But I think as a bass player, you're more in the role to put it in play all the time. You know, if I were to listen to some of the old records, I could say, well, here I was probably trying to play this chord and make her mention that this note that I'm playing is not the root of the chord, but it's the fifth of the chord. And Herbie, as sharp as he was, as sharp as he is, he'd understand that, oh, this is not a C chord. This is an F with C in the bass. And once we understood that kind of language, you know, the stuff kind of fell in place, or fell in place most of the times.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of material that's recorded for the time you were with Miles.
Yeah.
What is your favorite recording?
Well, you know, I haven't heard them all, and they're coming out with stuff every day. When I listen to them, I'm amazed at the results, because at the time we're playing it, we're just trying to work it out, you know. And as I've gotten older, and as I've taught more school and more classes and been asked more questions, I've had to go back and kind of analyze some of that stuff to try to figure out what was going on. And all I can come up with that those guys must have been crazy at that time, but it worked for them.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about spending time with Miles as a person? You told me once that he used to come over and hang out with your family over here.
Yeah, he loved my kids, Roger and Miles. He would horse around with them and show them boxing moves, stuff like that. And of course, to those kids, to my sons, just a neighbor. He wasn't a famous person who played trumpet. He was just a friend of Dad's, you know. And a lot of their friends, as they got older, didn't understand why they didn't feel awestruck by this guy coming in their house, you know. And they tried to explain to him, well, he was just my dad's friend, you know. We would talk, Miles and I, about politics. He was very into the Harlem, the African-American political scene at that time. He was over at the stock market, so we would talk about the stock market. Or he liked to go to the golf course. Well, that didn't interest me at all, but we'd go to the driving range and hit golf balls all day, you know. He was a good swimmer. I didn't swim, but we'd go to the pool and we would talk about the music, or he loved boxing. And because he knew some boxers, I would meet them as well. We would just talk about the sport. So it was a kind of a nice arrangement of conversation that covered everything, not specifically music.
I know you don't have all the time in the world to talk to us about record dates. It's been stated that you've been on well over 3,000 recordings.
That's a little high. It's probably 2,000.
Okay. Can you tell us, out of these recordings that you've done, a few of your favorites and some of the favorite musicians that you enjoyed working with?
Well, that's the same kind of question I'm trying to dodge. And again, if I list 4 or 5 records that are my favorites, and about 89 musicians who are my favorites to record with. That means that all those other guys, I'm thinking they will feel that I think they're less important to me and to the music I'm trying to play, or that they're not as helpful in my career, or that they're not important people in my life. And they are all those things. They've always helped me get better. They've always helped me maintain a standard. They've always recognized my standard. They've always been available to help me out if I want to know how a chord worked. Or they'd always ask me to bring a song to the recording session, or look to me when stuff got jammed up. What would you think, man? You know, so they're all a part of that process. And to limit the picture to 4 or 5 pixels, it doesn't do the picture any justice. They're all my friends, and I look forward to seeing them all as soon as I can.
Okay, I'd like to talk about a few of my favorite dates that you're on. I especially enjoy your work with McCoy Tyner on The Real McCoy, with Elvin Jones and Joe Henderson. What was that record date like? What did McCoy tell you? How was that session? Can you remember that? Or?
Well, you know, I've known McCoy a very long time, and he's become, again, one of my dear friends, as dear as the Elvins are. He just we had a rehearsal. The process at that time was to rehearse 2 days before the session, and then go out to Rudy's to make the recordings. We rehearsed like 2 to 6, so it's like Tuesday and Wednesday, and go to Rudy's on Thursday and record all day until we got the record done. You know? McCoy's a very, very good writer, and the people kind of let that go because he's trained and this piano influence, but he's a very, very good writer. And me being interested in composition is a chance for me to see how he puts the stuff together. Playing with Joe, who was also from Detroit, who I didn't know in Detroit. I haven't had a chance to listen to someone who was influenced by Sonny Rollins, but he's clearly Joe Henderson. So I got a chance to watch this maturation of his style. Not having played with Elvin, but hearing him on records, I was quite surprised that he didn't have, in the studio, he was experienced enough to know that you can't bash like you do at the nightclub. So another free lesson for me on how musicians put together their process in a limited space, recording studio with limited time. You know, that's some of my students. That's their favorite record, and I have to listen to it to find out exactly why. For them, it's okay. It's okay with me.
Well, you made a lot of, if I will, bold bass lines on, especially on Passion Dance. I mean, things you did on the bass I'd never heard before. I mean,
well, I have to listen to it. I have to get back to you on the phone. Cause I have the record. I have the LP actually, not a CD. And I'll tell you what I feel about it when I get a chance to listen to it next week.
Another one of my favorite recordings that you're on is Wayne's session, Speak No Evil, which you mentioned he was on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, yeah.
The album has such a magical and mysterious tone. Did it feel that way in the studio, or did it just come out that way? Or?
I think it just came out that way. Wayne is clearly an individual, and he brings such a dynamic, not just to his music, but when he's playing his music with other people, he's able to have them grasp his compositional emotion in a short space of time. In the studio, you don't have 25 takes. You got 3 chances to get it right in the next tune. You know. But again, we rehearsed before. We've got a sense of what I hoped he was looking for. And Wayne has a unique way of saying it's not quite right. You know, and once we understood his not quite right, we tried again and tried to find a different slant on what we hoped to be a much better picture of his music. You know, I miss playing with him because he's such a private player. And by that I mean he plays such private thoughts out loud. It's always been my position to play with him to see if I could not so much respond to his thoughts, but get to where he's going to be when he ends his thought, so I can kind of continue his sentence. You uh, special man, special player, special composer.
Yeah. Well, you were also really fortunate enough to work with the great Antonio Carlos Jobim on his recordings, including Wave, which is just a beautiful album. How did your working with him come about? And did you enjoy those sessions?
Well, he was with Verve, I think, at the time, and Creed Taylor was the A&R man for the dates. When I met Carlos, I had never played Brazilian music before I met him, and I spoke no Portuguese then at all. Fortunately, he speaks very good English. So I said, Carlos, what do you want me to do with this music? The drums sound different to me, the beat is different, and the changes are kind of like bebop, but they got their own thing happening with them, What shall I do with this? I said, well, the reason you're here is because you do what you do. Whatever that is, just do it over here. And we've had a great time.
Well, that kind of music, it's been immortalized all over the place on television, in movies, elevators, anywhere you go, you can hear it, and it's really great. And your work with Herbie Hancock also is just wonderful, especially Speak Like a Child and Maiden Voyage.
On those records, the bass sounded great on those records, man. The bass was just in charge. I just kind of go along for the ride,
Yeah, it's those things are some of the first jazz that I ever heard. And you mentioned that Herbie talked to you about chords and teaching you about chords. Anything else memorable that he showed you?
Well, I wouldn't say he was teaching me about chords. He showed me chord voicings, Herbie's very interested in gadgets. And he would just buy a gadget in a heartbeat. So I said, Herbie, what does that do? He said, well, it does this, and then you do this, and you do this, and then you do this, and it works okay. I said, well, for you, can you write that in 4 or 5 words or less so I can get this process down? Mm-hmm. So we always had a great time, and again, I would love to play with him within the next 8 minutes.
One very obscure record I'd never known about it until I saw it on YouTube. Was your 1980 album, Empire Jazz.
Oh yeah.
Star Wars theme.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because I really like Star Wars, and that was pretty unique, to hear that.
Well, someone knew Robert Stigwood, who had the label for the Bee Gees, and they heard that he had the rights to doing. He was interested in doing a jazz version of the movie Empire Strikes Back.
Yep.
And this person knew I was trying to get into writing music for film. So they told me that, well, the film's already out, but the person's interested in having a jazz version of some of those themes. I said, well, I think I could do that. So Mr. Stigwood's secretary, wherever she was, called me and said, Mr. Stigwood wants to talk to you about doing this project, and so I said, well, I have to go see the movie so I can find out what it is, So I went to see the movie, and thought there were some really nice melodies in there, but I didn't know how to do them for a jazz band. I had no music, I just had the movie on the screen. So, and as the process went on, he put me in touch with John Williams, who did the score, and he sent me the melodies he had written, and my job was to make them feel like a jazz project. So I got some guys who I knew who would not just trust my judgment, but if it could have been done better, they would have done it and told me after the date. But the thing about the project was that when they did the cover for the LP, they had to make sure that no alcohol was in the neighborhood of the characters of Star Wars. And they got a real lot of airplay. Unfortunately, Mr. Stigwood went on the boat and never came back. So all the projects, they kind of went like this, But it's one of my favorite records. I can tell you that, because I did it 4 years ago at the Chicago Jazz Orchestra. It was really nice.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
And for hip-hop aficionados, you were on 2 of the most influential hip-hop albums of all time. A Tribe Called Quest's Low End Theory. And inadvertently, that album actually inspired The Chronic by Dr. Dre, which you were quote-unquote illegally sampled from, right?
You know to deal with that.
And how did you feel about being part of early hip hop?
Well, you know, we all have the same notes. We're trying to all put them in a certain place that pleases us. You know? Not being well aware of the industry, but hearing some samples on radio, I thought that the language was really not what I would want to be associated with as approving of those sentences. I mean, they just kind of, it's not my language because it's a little different than that, you know. And you make a record, it's permanent. When people hear it, they think that you endorse that kind of language skill. So I wasn't really too keen on doing it because I didn't want to have that tag on my name. You know, you played these records, guys cursing and doing it. That's not what I do, man.
Yeah.
So I talked to my son who said that it's a good band, and they were really the most musical of the bands at that time. And if the guy calls back, take him up on it. So Q-Tip called me back. We had a discussion about the music and what I thought would satisfy my intellectual needs, you know, and I'm available at this certain time. If we can work it out, I'm happy to do it, you know. So I get to the studio and he has the script, the poems out. I said, would you read them to me so I can see what your angle is here, you know, what directions this stuff going, you know. And the words were really kind of nice, the ones I heard, you know. And I said, okay, we'll do this. So I picked the tracks with them. I said, now when I leave here, don't change the words.
Yeah.
You know, it worked out really very well for everybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that brought your bass playing to a pretty wide audience of younger musicians.
Yeah.
A few of my peers, they know you through that album.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Oh, Ron Carter, yeah, he's on, you know, Low End Theory. I mean, now talking about your work as a leader, you have recorded many works as a leader. How did you come to start writing music? What inspired you to move into the leader field? So
Well,
to speak?
I think every musician wants to be a band leader. Whatever the age level, whatever the experience level is, whatever instrument they play, they all want to be in charge. And bass players are no different. You know? And I just thought that I'd been a sideman long enough, and I had learned from all the bands I'd played with and watched play and listened to play. I thought that I could do a good job as a band leader. Not only that, I could hire musicians that I wanted to hire and have a library that I felt comfortable with because it was my choice of a library. The issue then was kind of find a band who agrees with my possibilities. So the first band I had was Kenny Barron on piano, and my dear friend Buster Williams on bass and Ben Riley on drums. We had a 4 or 5 year run that for me was a really great leadership growth time for me. And I cherish those moments as I still do those guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's some great music, and one of my favorite albums that you've produced is Friends, which is like
the next record.
Almost third stream classical and jazz.
Well, you know, that's not my term for it, but okay. It's a chance to write for 4 cellos and talk to Hubert Lawson coming to New York for as long as the date went on. And if you want to hear a flute playing, you have to listen to Hubert Lawson. So my view was that if I get these players on the date, if I write it right, music will take care of itself. And I'm very happy with the results.
Yeah, it's a great album. Okay, now moving on to some bass questions.
Okay. So with B-A-S-S or B-A-S-E?
B-A-S-S.
Okay.
You are truly a scientist on the bass and making it sound good. Can you tell us a little bit about your concept of making the bass sound good?
Well, I think, as I tell my students, the first thing you have to do is kind of get a sound in your ear that you want to be responsible for. That means whenever the bass comes out of the case, you got to have that sound in your ear. And you got to work toward maintaining that sound under any kind of circumstances. I've experimented with strings and different sound posts, and I've just kind of been a scientist of what effect do these things have in the sound I think I hear. And can I find the right combination of strings and instrument and hands and skill level to make the sound I think I hear always available to me. It's a long process, it's a very expensive process, it's a very time-consuming process, you know. I think once you get the sound in your ear and are willing to do what it takes, practice, 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 to get the sound you want all the time, kind of comes by itself sometimes, most of the time.
Well, how should people practice? Because, I mean, you really taught me about practicing. I didn't know anything about practicing before I started working with you.
Mm-hmm.
For people watching this, what can you tell them about practicing?
Well, my first comment to you was that you got to practice honestly. And by that I mean if it's not right, you can't say, okay, tomorrow's another day. You got to stay with it until you get it right. You can't accept almost as being good enough. You have to go in and look for some specific goals for this practice period. If you have an etude for a lesson, you have to start here and end here at the practice time, knowing that in this space, you've got either the better fingering, you've got the better bowing possibilities available, you've eliminated some jumps around the instrument, you get the intonation better under control, you're playing with great pulse. Everything has a beat to it. I think if you can kind of focus on these items as you practice, the practice becomes more productive, which is what it's supposed to be. And when you practice, you just don't jam with yourself, man. You just need to get something that gets you better. And I'm not so sure that playing by yourself all day in your room with a bass player is going to get you better. You need to have some parameters. You need to start here, you need to end here, and in this spot in here, have a productive point of view.
And as a student of yours, you've told me something that frustrates you about music programs, that they spend a lot of time requiring bassists to learn melodies and soloing, but not enough time teaching bass players how to walk and create bass lines, and the theoretical aspects of the bass. For people watching this, what are your comments on how the bass should be taught to students? And what should,
That's a pretty long paragraph you just gave to me, and I hope the answer is not too short for the length of the paragraph. I think bass players are kind of missing the boat these days, in that they kind of lay as invisible as they can on the bandstand playing time, and when it comes time for a bass solo, the light goes brighter and they get brighter and play more energetically, play more enthusiastically, play louder, play more insistent, For me, I try to tell them if they can look at playing time with people and the fun you can have by making them play different changes as you build your bass line. If you can steer the music from a swing tune to a chorus of more of a Brazilian beat, make the band go over here for a minute. Or if you can make the saxophone player raise his eyebrows when you play a D flat on the F chord. If you can get that happening, that's the fun of the bass playing for me. And, I could play a year, man, and not need the solo to be comfortable as a bass player. Because I enjoy being in charge of the band, and I think bass players are. I enjoy bass players who solo. That their skill level. I watch these guys play, man, the ladies too. And I just get stunned at how much time it took to do that, to learn how to do what they do, And if they could devote half of that time to learning how to create a bass line, to make someone else hear the bass line as being as important as the soloist, they would get just as rewarded by doing that, And I think that once they understand the options available to them, the solo line doesn't seem so critical to their success as a musician as the bass player.
As a bassist, what do you think it is that makes you such a highly sought after sideman and musician? What is it that people want from Ron Carter?
You have to ask those guys or gals. I can answer that, man.
Okay, well, your concept of the beat and how it works with time is incredible, and it's been mentioned that part of it has to do with whether you're playing slightly ahead of the beat or in the middle of the beat or slightly behind the beat. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Well, I think that I play on the beat. I mean, if the band leader, he or she, counts like this, that's where they want the beat to be. Why would I play like this? Or this? And clearly they want this. Now my rhythms may seem to a listener or a person that I'm playing ahead of this beat. I may play my note here, but I'm still playing this beat. So I think I'm neither ahead of the beat or behind the beat player. I just try to play where the beat is and make my rhythms still fit in this circle of where the beat is really supposed to be.
Well, as someone who's attended college for 50 years ago, I mean, a very long time ago, what has changed about music programs since your time in school? I know you've been the head of City College. And,
well, I think schools are now having jazz programs. And one reason they may be having these programs is that it gets more students who would not be at that school anyway. You have classical schools, classical colleges, conservatories. And one of the reasons they may have added jazz programs to their list of subjects is to increase the size of the student body. I mean, you may have 8 or 9 guys out, musicians, who play saxophone and clarinet. But the orchestra only has 2 clarinet players, man. But the saxophone section has 5 saxophone players who play clarinet, who play oboe, who play flute, who double and everything, man, you know? So I think one of the reasons you see these jazz programs at these classical conservatories, clearly it increases the student body. I think also students, they want to do that, man. They don't want to play in an orchestra. They don't want to play in a chamber group. They want to play Stan Kenton band, you know, the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band, or my band, you know. They want to find out what that's like to do that. And you just can't do that without having some kind of experience before you walk into those situations. So these schools kind of got it going for them all around the board. And then clearly, I think their enrollment with the jazz programs have gone up. And I think their attendance at the concerts has also increased because people want to hear that kind of stuff too.
do you think that's a problem, that there are so many young people being pushed out onto the scene? Do you think that can eventually make it difficult for people to really, the more established musicians to really work if there's all these young musicians that are doing gigs for free?
Well, the issue, as you bring up now, is more economical than musical. The problem is that if these young musicians continue to work at a much lower rate than they are worth, it's very difficult to raise your price once the word gets out that you will work for X number of dollars below the fee of someone else. Club owners understand, I think, business-wise, that while that's okay up to a point, to fill their rooms, they need a bigger name act. As far as the many players who are out there playing, it'll dawn on them at some point that they're outpriced, that they're underpricing their services. And to get to the bigger rooms, they won't have a chance because the guy knows how little they work for. The talent level is another issue. The young players maybe don't play good enough. That's not my decision, of course. But the fact is that everybody can't play good. Everybody can't be up here, man. There's always these intermediate levels, some of those musicians who were unable to make it to the big time, however they found to find that, they have been great teachers who are not quite able to make the big New York scene. There's wonderful jazz composers who never quite made the big New York scene. So those players who are unable to get to this level up here, if they have the tenacity to be a musician, they will find somewhere in the jazz community to function and earn a living and be community satisfied.
Well,
2 more questions and that.
Come to the end. What direction do you think jazz is headed in the future?
I have no idea, but if you find the address, give it to me.
Okay. One concept that you instilled in me is how you mentioned that every note counts. It appears to me that this is not only in music for you, in every aspect of your life, and it makes you very successful. where did this kind of ethic and philosophy of yours come from?
That's kind of a difficult question to answer because again, all these bands I play with and all the responsibility I had in these bands, they just kind of mount up after a while. And you see a path and say, okay, I'm going to go this way. My family, my dad was a person who insisted on things being right and not taking almost as being good enough. You know? And the more I played, the more I get to realize that all notes aren't equal. There's some that are better than others. And my job has been to try to find those better notes to see if I can make them work in the context of the group I'm playing with.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Carter. Just one last question because I have.
Okay.
Okay. I had a couple of people emailed me, wanted to ask you questions.
Okay.
So
I'll take two of them.
okay, that's what I had. You hear it from musicians that you should take every gig, but to what extent does what extent do you feel that this is true? Is there ever a point where you should decide to really focus on what you want to do and focus on that?
Well, I think many young musicians, I'm not sure how we mean young, but most of them young have not formed enough of a concept or a musical view of their own, or experience enough on how to respond to information around them that's coming at them on the bandstand. And I think these musicians need to play as often as they can to get these specific skills in place. They need to know how to pick a library for a set. They need to know what's the best tune, what's the best key for this tune, what's the best tempo for this tune, how to limit your solos to a reasonable length, how to make the band come to work and look forward to coming to work with you. But you can't get these experiences doing one gig a week. You get them by doing these little coffee house gigs over there and this little thing over here, and you just kind of pile it up and pile it up. And when I came to New York, Bill Lee, a great bass player, a fabulous writer, he was like the king of the folk musicians, bass players. But there was so much work at that time that he couldn't do it all, so I ended up doing the work he couldn't do. So I got a chance to play with some wonderful folk singers who showed me things that I would not learn from the jazz community necessarily. I subbed at Broadway shows. I played the gigs where you play 4 sets a night for the weekend. I mean, these kind of environments are a chance to see if you really mean this business. And if you're going to be open enough to this environment to pick up on all these facts that come at you, how you talk to the club owner, how you dress for the gig, how early you get to the gig, how you decide what is your worth for this gig. You can only find out those things by putting yourself in that environment. And my general concern, the musicians come to New York and they're already leaders. I think that's just kind of putting the cart before the horse. And at some point, we all decide, I had enough of this gig, or enough of this kind of gig, or enough of that process over there. I don't know what they based those, I had enough of based on. For me, I just thought that, okay, I've done this and I've learned all these items. Can I put these items I've learned with this level over here and still maintain the integrity of the music and my personal view of how I have to get it done? I think when these musicians who are worried about what the drag this gig is and not getting paid enough money and whatever negativity they find in these gigs, they're missing a chance to grow. And I think that they're trying to control their own growth spurts by being more selective than they can be at that point in their career.
Okay, one last question. This is a drummer question for a bassist.
Okay.
In order to avoid a muddy sound between bass frequency and bass drum frequency, How do you like the bass drum tuned?
Well, working with Tootie Heath and Peyton Crosley, Burnett Fournier, some wonderful drums, I've seen them take the bass drum head off and put newspaper in there to kind of control the amount of vibrations that go on in there. Occasionally, that's not possible. It's just that if you're just sitting on the jam session, you're just kind of hanging out. I try to, if it's possible, try to have them tune the bass drum so it's not in the range of my A and my E. Because it just wipes out all those notes, man. It's like I'm playing with the mute button on, man, you know? Sometimes the floor tom-tom is the wrong note for my instrument. And in my groups that I'm responsible for, I try to have the drummer tune that tom-tom so it's not in my mid-range. In my group, the drummer plays with a piccolo snare drum, which is a really bright sound, which makes, for me, the whole range from here to here is wide open because it's not this drum sound of pitch that's in the way of my range, you know. But sometimes you don't have those choices. So my choice then is that can I find these notes and still get out of this bass drum range or this tom-tom range and still have my notes available to everybody for each note.
Okay, well, Mr. Carter, thanks a lot for doing this interview. And where can people find your book and your website?
Well, my book is called Finding the Right Notes. It's available through Artist Share, or you can go on my website, www.roncarter.net, and you will find a button that tells you how to order the book. Thanks for your time and spending the afternoon with me with the telephone and all that stuff going on to have a nice conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.